Today we will be solving equations involving decimals. So we're going to end up having to either add, subtract, multiply, or divide to come up with the answer. So let's take a look at our first one here. And we're using opposite operations to solve. So notice that it's t plus 77 hundredths. So in order to isolate the t, I need to subtract 77 hundredths from both sides. Now the problem is I have a number that doesn't have a decimal point, so I need to add that decimal point and add a couple zeros there, and then put that 77 hundredths underneath the correct place values. So whenever we're adding or subtracting, we've got to line up decimal points. So we go ahead and do that, and we borrow a few times, change that 9 to an 8, and the 10 to a 9, and then we'd go ahead and do the subtractions. So I've got a 3 is what I get when I subtract 7 from 10. 7 from 9 gives me 2. Bring the decimal down, and I bring down the 8. So the answer is t equals 8 and 23 hundredths. And of course, we can check our answer by just adding the two numbers. See, 8 and 23 hundredths plus the 77 hundredths should end up adding to make 9. And when you go ahead and do the adding, it sure enough does make 9. So you can always check your answer by plugging the answer back into the equation. So again, we're going to end up doing an opposite operation. So this is a minus, so I'm going to end up adding 1 and 34 hundredths to both sides. Just make sure you line up the decimal points again. And if you don't see a place value there, then just add a 0 as a placeholder. And so I see that they are opposite in sign. So here I have to subtract once more. And so I'm going to end up having to borrow from the 8, change it to a 7. Start doing the subtraction. I'm left with a 6, a 4, bring the decimal down, and then 10. So the answer is negative 10 and 46 hundredths because I have more negatives than I have positives. So that's what P equals. So I'll take a look at the next one. Here we have 3 and 8 tenths right next to G. So that means we're multiplying 3 and 8 tenths by G. So I'm going to end up dividing to undo that multiplication. So when I do that, a couple things I'm going to end up doing first. First, I'm going to move the decimal in the divisor over one space. I'll do the same with the dividends decimal. And so now I've got 38 into 1,041 and 2 tenths. Bring that decimal point straight up. So a couple things with division and decimals you have to remember is always think about where that decimal point is and always bring it straight up into the quotient. Now let's take a look at our sign, because that's going to be another mistake that people will make, because they'll get so excited doing the division, they'll forget about the sign they're supposed to have there. This is going to be a negative because we have just one negative here. So now I start doing the division. 38 into 1, well, that's 0 times. Into 10, that's another 0. So we're doing 38 into 104. So when I do that division, I think of 38 as close to 40. And I'm doing 40 into 104. So I'm going to cross off this 0 and cross off that 4 and think of 4 into 10. How many times does 4 go into 10? Well, that's 2 times. So that's the number I'm going to use. I'm putting it right above the 4 here. And then I multiply. And so when I multiply 2 times 8, I get 16. Carry a 1, 2 and 3 make 6, plus 1 makes 7. And I subtract. Now make sure you borrow when you're doing that subtraction. You end up with 28. And then you want to bring down the 1. So now I do the same thing. But instead of a 38, again, I'm thinking of 40 into 281. Well, 4 times 7 makes 28. So I'm going to go ahead and try that number. So let's put a 7 right there, right above the 1, and multiply 7 times 38. And so 7 times 8 makes 56, and 7 times 3 makes 21, plus 5 ends up giving me 26. So now I can go ahead and do that subtraction. Again, you've got to borrow a little bit. So I'll change this to a 8 to a 7, and I'll do the subtraction. I'm left with a 1 and a 5. Now I bring down that 2, and again, I've already got my decimal point straight up, and I now think of 38, but instead of 38, I'm going to treat it as 40 again, into 152. Again, cross off that 0, cross off this one. How many times does 4 go into 15? Well, let's try it. Well, almost 4 times, because I did round this up from 38 to 40. And so also I see 8 times 4 makes 32 at 2 at the end. So I'm going to try 4. It's really close. Remember, I rounded up to 40. So I'm going to go ahead and try 4. And when I do that multiplication of 4 and 38, I end up getting a 32. 4 and 3 make 12, plus 3 makes 15, and it does end up working out. So there it is, negative 27 and 4/10. Over here I need to multiply by 9 and 7/10 on both sides. And so when I do that, I've got some multiplication to do. Now, we don't worry about lining up decimals when we're multiplying, but it just so happens to work out in this problem that they are lined up. And so I go ahead and do the work, and I got 56, and 7 times 0 plus the 5 makes 5. 2 and 7 make 14. I bring down a 0 as a placeholder, and now multiply by the next place value over. So 9 and 8 makes 72, and 9 and 0 plus the 7 makes 7. 9 times 2 makes 18. And I add that stuff up. So I get 6, 7, 11, carry a 1, makes 10, and carry another 1, I get 2. So I've got this large number. Now I have to move the decimal, though, 2 spaces back. So it goes right between the 7 and the 1. So the number is 201 and 76 hundredths. Let's take a look at our next problem. It's some word problems here. Jeff paid a flat fee of $269.50 a year for vet visits for his 4 cats, and he made 14 visits. Well, does it matter that he has 4 cats, 1 cat, 2 cats? Doesn't matter how many cats. This is extra information. We don't need that. See, he paid this flat fee for 14 visits. We want to find out the average cost per visit. So average cost per visit, if I was to set up an equation, we don't know what this average cost per visit is. But if we take that and multiply it, we'll call it C for average cost per visit. So I'll say that this value right here, including that per visit there, equals C. So average cost per visit. So 14 visits times the average cost per visit equals $269.50. So now what I'm going to end up doing is solving by dividing. So I'm going to divide by 14 on both sides. So when I do that, I set up my division problem, 269.5. Now I'll bring the decimal point straight up and start doing the division. So 14 goes into 26 one time, and I end up having, let's see here, a 2, a 1 and a 2 and a 9 there. So 14 goes into 129. I have 9 times. So the way I got that is, it was 14. If I treat that as 1, and I'll round that up to a 2, and I cross off the 9 here and the 4 here, well, 2 goes into 12 6 times, but remember, I rounded this quite up a bit, so I went ahead and went with the 9, and when I do that multiplication, I end up with 126. So I end up with 3 left over, and now I've got to bring down the 5. And so I'm kind of running out of room here, but we have 14 into 35, ends up going in there 2 times. So I'm going to put my 14 or 35 up here and do the subtraction. 2 times 14 makes 28, and I end up having to carry a 0 down, because when I do the subtraction, I'm left with a 3, and I bring down that, let's see here, I left with 3, and that's it, just that, sorry, 7. I have a 7 down, and I go ahead and bring that extra 0 down that I have right here, and 14 goes into 75 times evenly. So there it is, $19.25. So looking at our next problem here, it says the diameter of the secondary mirror of NASA's Hubble telescope is 0.3 meters. The primary mirror is 8 times larger. So they want to know the diameter of the primary mirror. Well, the primary mirror is 8 times larger. So here's the primary mirror. If it's 8 times larger, to equal 0.3, I would need to divide it by 8. See, this is what I would end up doing to get that 0.3, because it's 8 times larger. Another way to do it is just to take this 8 and multiply it on both sides. And that's what I do to solve this equation. So if the primary mirror is 8 times larger, I would need to multiply the secondary mirror by 8 to have those equal. And so when I do that, it's just 8 times by 0.3. And that makes 24, then move the decimal back 1 space. So the primary mirror is 2 4/10 meters, is the diameter of that primary mirror. A cubic centimeter of a titanium weighs 4 507 thousandths grams. The same volume of gold weighs a lot more, 18 3/10 grams. How much more does the gold weigh? Well, if I was to take that 4 507 thousandths, I'd have to add how much more it is to equal 19 3/10. So to solve this, I need to subtract. I need to subtract that 4 507 thousandths from both sides. Make sure you line up the decimals, though. So you got to line up those decimals, carry some zeros, and then do the subtraction. So I'll need to end up subtracting, so I need to borrow all the way back from the 9, change it to an 8, change the 13 to a 12, the 10 to a 9, and now I can do the subtraction. So I end up with a 3, a 9, we have, it looks like that makes a 12, so 12 minus 5 gives me 7, bring the decimal point straight down, 8 minus 4 gives me 4, and then the 1. So there it is, 14 and 793 thousandths gram less is what that titanium weighs from the gold compared to the gold. And looking at the next one, Brianna drives 3 35 hundredths miles to work every day. This is, so we'll write equals, so that is tells me an equals sign right here, means equal, and that is 175 hundredths of a mile less, so less than the amount that Darius drives. And so I'm going to use a D for Darius, and I have that amount, 175 miles, 1 75 hundredths of a mile less than Darius equals the amount Brianna drives. So to solve, that means Darius drives more, so that's why I end up having to add the 1 75 hundredths to both sides. So when I do that addition, I get 10, carry a 1, and that makes 11, carry another 1, and that makes 5. And so it's 5 and 10 hundredths miles is how far Darius drives to work. Last one here, it says the weight of an object on Mars is 38 hundredths times its weight on Earth. So if I was to write an equation for that, it would be Mars equals 38 hundredths times the weight on Earth. So the weight of Mars equals, because it says is, equals 38 hundredths times its weight on Earth. How much would a 125-pound person weigh on Mars? We don't know, so that's what I know. Let's put the 125 in place of E, and then times by 38 hundredths. So when I do that multiplication, I'm going to put the 125 and the 0.38. Notice you don't need to line up decimals when you multiply, just move the decimal over afterwards. So we do the multiplication, we get 40. 16 and 4 make 20, carry a 2. That makes 8 and 2 make 10. And then we have to add that 0 as a placeholder and do some more multiplication. That makes 15, carry a 1. 3 and 2 plus 1 makes 7, and 3 and 1 make 3. So we add that stuff up, and we end up with a 0, a 5, a 7, and a 4. Move that decimal over 2 spaces because of these 2 placeholders there, place values, and that would be 47 and 5/10 pounds, or 47 and 50 hundredths pounds. Well, those are the problems that you'll end up seeing on tonight's homework, similar problems to tonight's homework, so good luck.